You're listening to Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Coming up on the show, the trial of ComEd lobbyists continues with a possibly damning last witness. Democrats choose Chicago to host their 2024 convention. And as some local museums vote to unionize, a handful of Illinois University faculty take part in ongoing strikes. Those stories and much more in our one-hour weekly news recap. Join us now on WBEZ's YouTube or Facebook pages if you'd like to watch us spill the tea. It's all happening right after the latest news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The 21-year-old Air National Guardsman accused of leaking U.S. intelligence documents appeared in federal court this morning in Boston. A federal judge has ordered Jack Teixeira to be held in custody for now. NPR's Ryan Lucas with details.
Jack Teixeira's initial court appearance comes less than 24 hours after he was arrested by the FBI at his home in North Dighton, Massachusetts. At the hearing, the court ordered that Teixeira remain in custody pending a detention hearing on Wednesday. According to an FBI affidavit, Teixeira worked as a cyber defense operations journeyman for the Massachusetts Air National Guard. He allegedly first began posting classified information on a gamer site in December. The FBI tracked Teixeira down through account and subscriber records from the gamer platform where the documents were first posted. He is charged with the unauthorized removal, retention, and transmission of classified national defense information. Ryan Lucas, NPR News, Washington.
Investigators say the classified documents, some of which included information about the war in Ukraine, were accessible online for weeks before the breach was flagged. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the nation's security clearance protocols are now under examination.
The Department of Defense is leading an important effort now to evaluate and review the national security implications, and most important, to conduct a review of the methods of access, accountability, and control procedures.
Separately, Garland also announced charges against 28 members of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, including the sons of the notorious drug lord Joaquin Guzman, known as El Chapo, who is serving life in a U.S. prison. Now that the two Democratic lawmakers have been reinstated to the Tennessee State House after being expelled, they want to resume their efforts to limit access to firearms. From member station WPLN, Blaise Gainey reports they're expected to face resistance.
Representatives Justin Jones and Justin J. Pearson want Tennessee to have red flag laws, which Republican Governor Bill Lee recently came out and mildly supported. But Jones spoke about the need to go further.
It's a step forward, but there's a lot more that needs to happen. That was a step forward. We need to ban assault weapons. We need safe storage laws. We need these red flag laws. We need universal background checks. All these young people, we need to listen to what they're saying. While banning assault weapons is a long shot, there is hope from the governor and Democrats that red flag laws could be done this session. However, Republicans, who have a supermajority, have yet to show support. For NPR News, I'm Blaise Gainey in Nashville.
Tens of thousands of people are expected at this weekend's National Rifle Association Conference in Indianapolis. Republicans seeking the GOP 2024 presidential nomination, including former President Donald Trump, are expected to be in attendance. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 250 points. You're listening to NPR News.
It's 12:04, sunny skies and 75 degrees, going up to 80. I'm Lisa Labez with WBEZ News. 13 environmental groups are suing the EPA. They allege the agency has failed to regulate polluted wastewater that's going into bodies of water like Lake Michigan. WBEZ's Indy Cara has the story.
Advocates say the EPA has not made required updates to its standards for industrial wastewater pollution in almost 40 years. Jen Duggan with the Environmental Integrity Project says this has allowed the BP Whiting refinery in Indiana to dump polluted wastewater into the lake.
We actually have the technologies that are available and in use right now to clean up this wastewater pollution. There's really just no excuse for not requiring these oil and petrochemical industries to use modern wastewater treatment controls.
The EPA and BP did not respond to requests for comment. Indy Cara, WBEZ News.
Faculty and staff at Eastern Illinois University are back on the job today after reaching a tentative agreement with the university. The union representing EIU educators met yesterday and decided to officially consider the administration's final offer and suspend a 6-day strike. Isn't clear whether the Chicago Bulls sixth man will be in the stands in Miami tonight. 9-year-old DeMar DeRozan stole the show Wednesday night in Toronto by shrieking every time the Raptors were making free throws. Her dad, Bulls star DeMar DeRozan, shut down questions about whether she'll be allowed to skip school to get to tonight's game. United Airlines, based in Chicago, has posted on social media the flight to Miami is on them if DeMar changes his mind. You're listening to WBEZ.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fidelity Investments. A dedicated advisor can help create a wealth plan for a full financial picture. More at fidelity.com/wealth. Investment minimums apply. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. It is Friday at noon, so you know what time it is. It's time for our weekly news recap. That's where we catch you up on the biggest state and local stories that you might have missed but need to know about. Stories like these.
The president called Governor Pritzker this morning, giving him the verbal thumbs up. Governor Pritzker saying, Mr. Biden, Chicago is your kind of town.
We are honored and pleased to be the host committee for the Democratic National Convention in 2024.
We've got a lot to discuss, so let's jump right in. And here to help us make sense of the week's news is Chicago Tribune political reporter Alice Yin. Welcome back, Alice.
Thank you.
Also here, David Greising, president of the Better Government Association. Hey, David.
Hi, Sasha.
And WBEZ state politics reporter Dave McKinney. Hi, Dave.
Sasha, why are we not doing this outside?
I know, right? I'm so sorry. I do want to give a special shout out, though, to the folks who are watching us break down the week's news live right now. Hopefully they're getting some sunshine, too, on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also watch the live stream on Reset's Facebook page. Hi, folks. All right, let's jump in. State Democratic leaders, they were celebrating this week. They were gearing up to host a massive political party. I'm talking about next summer's Democratic National Convention. How surprised were all of you that Chicago beat out New York and Atlanta?
Not terribly, frankly. The whole blue wall argument, trying to secure these Midwestern states, this fits. And especially given that the Republicans are doing this in Milwaukee, right? So that, you want to match that.
Eyes were on the Midwest anyway. Yeah. Any surprises for you, Alice?
No, I think what was really compelling is J.B. Pritzker's purse strings. I think, given that he gave $10 million to the Wisconsin Supreme Court race and has just been a really consistent funder for a lot of Democratic causes. Why wouldn't you just accept that versus risk having more debt in the other cities? So.
Yeah, for sure. Dave?
Somebody needs to play the Macarena because that was the song of the song of the 1996 DNC here in Chicago.
An all-time
I saw a video of that earlier.
Some of us there's some scar tissue in my head of all these politicians doing the Macarena.
I used to be really good at the Macarena. So what details, Alice, do we have so far on what the convention will actually look like?
Not much. We know it's going to be at the United Center in the evening, I believe. Mm-hmm. We know that one of the main reasons Chicago was chosen because it's a strong union town, so you can expect that we're going to be picking union hotels that the CFL is going to be, and all their conglomerate unions are going to be, vying for, contracts and vendors that are going to support that cause. I think it remains to be seen how security is going to be handled, but we have a lot of lessons to learn from past conventions. So, it remains to be seen.
Yeah, it's going to be held August 19th through 22nd and is expected to bring between 5,000 and 7,000 delegates and alternates and up to 50,000 visitors to the city. Dave, Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's a co-chair of the Democratic National Committee, now she says that she's been working on this for almost 2 years. Walk us through some of the other main players here, bringing the convention here.
Well, I mean, I think, of course, Governor Pritzker, was front and center in this whole thing. I mean, he and his chief of staff, Ann Caprara, were the ones that kind of, had the dream child. Let's do this. And so, having Senator Duckworth be in this position of authority, having friendly relations with Joe Biden, and then more importantly, being in a state where, it's so heavily blue in Illinois that it's not a problem hosting a president whose approval ratings are as bad as Biden's are. They don't have to run from him.
Yeah.
And so Pritzker, I think, was the main driver and shaker of this, and it was his relationship with Biden that really swung things. Plus, the purse strings.
And it fits into his effort to carve out a significant national profile.
Yeah.
And also, besides his own money, he also pulled in, you look at the picture of the press announcement, the character that's not as well known as Michael Sachs, who is a nationally prominent fundraiser and is also going to kind of signed on to kind of run the backside of this in terms of working with delegates, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a significant group. And Chicago's history with the 68 convention is, of course, troubled. The 99 convention went off without a hitch. And then they recently had the NATO meeting. So they're prepared to run this. Yeah, I think so.
I mean, to your point earlier, I mean, it's interesting that the two political conventions will be held 90 minutes from each other. Is this a sign here? Is the Midwest going to be this central battleground in the presidential election, you think, David?
Well, absolutely. And we've already seen that Governor Pritzker got involved in that Supreme Court race that put Janet Protasevich, a liberal justice, onto the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And there are going to be some rulings by that court about presumably about voting rights, et cetera, heading into the 2024
abortion too.
Yeah.
And abortion convention.
Alice, although Mayor Lightfoot had been lobbying to bring the convention here, she actually won't be the mayor next summer when it's taking place. What did Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson have to say about all of this, though?
Yeah, he pitched, I guess, a very forward-thinking message to Biden when the president called him to congratulate him for his victory. He was saying, Chicago is where the excitement is at. Chicago is where our progressive values as Democrats are really like taking shape and taking over. And I think he really tried to convince Biden that the excitement is in Chicago versus, Atlanta and New York, where, I think Georgia and Atlanta hold a special place in Biden's heart because of, how it helped him get elected and their history as a cradle of the civil rights movement.
Right.
But, Republican-controlled, right-to-work state. New York, meanwhile, strongly blue, of course. But I feel like there hasn't been that much excitement about, progressive values winning in New York. They honestly lost a lot of races in the midterms, even in New York City proper. So I think the state Democrats there have some figuring out to do, I think.
Yeah. Another question on folks' minds, David. Folks might be asking this. How much is this incredible party going to cost all of us? The taxpayers.
The estimate is $80 million. That's, taxpayers. It's going to cost rich people $80 million. The promise is that it won't cost taxpayers a nickel. And in fact, the sale pitch to Chicagoans is, hey, there's going to be all kinds of economic development. The Philadelphia convention in 2016, the last full-blown convention, supposedly generated $230 million of economic impact. And going back to Brandon Johnson, he made a statement about this is going to include the West Side. And the United Center technically is on the West Side.
Yes.
But if you mean the far West Side, the neighborhoods, that would be unprecedented if they figure out a way to make the neighborhoods involved in care about this kind of convention. Vendors might come from some of the neighborhoods, but it fits into Brandon Johnson's messaging. And then we also will find out a little bit about how effective he is, if he really is able to help bring the neighborhoods in and help them benefit from this.
Talking about the money, as you said, Pritzker's promised that taxpayers won't be picking up the bill. He's even gone so far as to hint that he will fund it if necessary. Let's listen to a bit of what he had to say on Wednesday.
Me personally, what I guaranteed is that I and the committee that we put together will work extraordinarily hard to raise all of the dollars necessary.
Any thoughts on how they will raise that money, Dave?
You know what? I don't think they're going to have any trouble at all. I mean, this is the corporate purse strings. Chicago is home to, the Abbott Labs and on. We've got corporate headquarters here. They're all going to want a piece of this. Even some Republican donors might jump in, just to help kind of burnish the city's image here a little bit. But by and large, there's not going to be a problem with money here. I think, to your point earlier, David, about, the potential economic impact of this. I think, I've seen, to counter that a little bit, I've seen some, studies that show that the economic impact of these things is pretty marginal. It's more just a kind of a fun weekend for political nerds. There's this bubble that kind of goes over the city,
absolutely.
and you might one day be at a crosswalk and there go the Foo Fighters, you know, just walking across the way. I mean, I remember that happened to me when I was in Charlotte covering the convention down there. And, you know, these things, they're good in a way, and especially, you know, in a city coming out of the pandemic when, you know, we kind of, you know, there are parts of downtown, for example, that are really kind of empty. You know, this will bring people there, and that is a good thing. You know, but this will not be the end all be all answer economically to anything, I don't think.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with Chicago Tribune political reporter Alice Yin, WBEZ state politics reporter Dave McKinney, and David Greising, president of the Better Government Association. A reminder to folks that you can now watch the weekly news recap live on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also leave us a comment or question. You can talk to us in that YouTube chat box, and I may just read what you have to say about these stories on the air. Shamrock Bloom, our wonderful friend on YouTube, says, I love that they are coming to Chicago. It will be hard for the far west side neighborhoods to benefit from the economic impact of the influx of people. So back to our conversation before, you know, besides agreeing to pick up the tab for this party, what would you say, David, are some of the other reasons that the DNC might have chosen us?
Well, Chicago, the what's going on with Brandon Johnson's election, as he said on election night, is this merger of union, the progressive agenda, and civil rights. I mean, that's something that he's trying to push very hard and will be a theme of his campaign. And for the Democratic Party, which is fighting against an increasingly conservative Republican Party, at least the Trump wing, as well as a Supreme Court that has no interest in the civil rights agenda, this is an opportunity to push back and really make Chicago's selection a litmus test for the progressive and civil rights agenda, in contrast to the agenda the Republican Party is pushing out there. So it does, the Milwaukee-Chicago duopoly there really does say a lot about politics in this country at this particular moment in time. And we have a little more than a year now to watch that unfold.
Yeah. And as we've mentioned, Dave, the 1996 Democratic Convention, it really transformed the West Side around the United Center from industrial and blighted into this hip area with trendy, expensive restaurants even. You covered the 96 convention. Talk more about the impact you think that convention had and what kind of impact next summer's convention will have.
Well, you know, David brought up the 1968 convention, and up until that point, that was kind of what was on people's minds. You know, that was we were in the midst of a war in Vietnam. There were, there were assassinations, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. The country was just torn apart, and then it didn't help. You know, when young people came here to protest conditions, to have Mayor Daley unleash, you know, billy clubs and such.
The police rioted is what the Warren report
the
said
Grant Park, you know, people getting clubbed in the head over that was a terrible, terrible thing. And so 1996 was just the opposite. It was kind of a, you know, we had at that point, the United Center was a brand new building. It was, you know, this bubble that got created. You know, I remember there were public works efforts underway. And I think, you know, if you're driving on the, you know, through town there, you can still look the bridge over the 9094 was one that they had decked out with kind of this patriotic looking stuff. It's kind of run down now, but there are relics of it. But
I bet it gets repainted.
Yeah, at a minimum, maybe spruced up. But it's a good thing for the city. There's no question.
Alice, is part of the hope here that the convention is going to bring people and businesses back into the loop in Michigan Avenue?
I would say the main hope is probably more optics-wise, like harder to pin down. You know, there will be, as we talked about, the temporary influx of, you know, money and business. But I think overall it's a chance for Chicago to recast its reputation. I would say
could it change this narrative of, you know, Chicago is just this public face of crime?
I think so. You know, within an hour of it being announced, we have Republican spokespeople like joking about, you better get your bulletproof vest ready. And it's certainly not a new joke people make about Chicago, but I think since the pandemic, our reputation has been kind of really battered even more. And, you know, there is some merit to it. We have struggled a lot in the past few years. And I think this is a chance to show we are a world-class city, as a lot of people like to say.
Mm-hmm.
And we bring a lot of both diversity and we kind of represent, I guess, the most American city, as other people like to say, and it could kind of really dispel notions about Chicago.
Yeah.
And that's not going to, change just from one convention, but it's a good step.
That is the Chicago Tribune's Alice Yin, WBEZ's Dave McKinney, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. They're going to stick around, and we hope that you will too, because there is a lot more news to get to. But first, we'll take a quick moment and check back in with Lisa Labis. Crews are making progress to extinguish a major industrial fire in eastern Indiana.
Sasha, an Indiana fire chief, says crews are still trying to work on the hot spots. An evacuation order for people living nearby in Richmond remains in place today. Fire Chief Tim Brown says it could be weeks before this fire is considered fully extinguished. As of this morning, smoldering continues within a vast amount of plastic materials stored at the fire site. The Justice Department today is charging 28 members of Mexico's powerful Sinaloa cartel, including sons of notorious drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, in a sprawling fentanyl trafficking investigation. Charges were filed against cartel leaders, alleged chemical suppliers, lab managers, fentanyl traffickers, security leaders, financiers, and weapons traffickers. New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection has issued a violation notice against itself for wrongly clearing nearly 15 acres of a wildlife management area. Work in February and March was supposed to create a habitat for the American woodcock, but it destroyed habitat for the barred owl, that's a threatened species, and destroyed habitat for the red-shouldered hawk, which is an endangered species. A division of the department now has 30 days to decide how to restore the site in Clayton in the southwestern part of New Jersey. It's 12:21. This is WBEZ.
Recently on Wait, Don't Tell Me, Luke Burbank expressed some skepticism about a new law in Utah that keeps minors from using social media.
I don't feel like there's a strong history of keeping people off of websites.
Well, the thing is,
self-reporting.
I'm Peter Sagal. You don't have to prove anything to listen to this week's news quiz with champion beatboxer Kayla Milady. Join us for Wait from NPR. Saturday at 10 and again Sunday morning at 11 on WBEZ.
WBEZ is supported by the Old Town School of Folk Music, a nonprofit music school offering group classes in guitar, banjo, wiggleworms, and more. Details on the new in-person sessions beginning April 24th at oldtownschool.org. And WBEZ is supported by Northwestern's Engineering Master of Product Design and Development Management, where students prepare for an innovative future in product management, business, and design. Open house on April 29th, mpd.northwestern.edu. Great day today. Sunny skies, warming up to 80. It's already 78 degrees at O'Hare. Cloudy tonight, a low of 59. Another sunny, warm day on Saturday, a high near 79. And then the showers Saturday night bring cooler temperatures on Sunday and Monday. Maybe some snow on Monday. Yay. It's 12:23 WBEZ.
I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, back now with more Reset and more of our weekly news recap, which, by the way, you can watch right now on WBEZ's YouTube page or on the Reset Facebook page. And speaking of social media, I've got to drop this reminder that your favorite radio show is on TikTok. So if you're on there, give us a follow as well at WBEZ_Reset. All right, let's jump back into the news.
Officer Eric Stillman has been placed on a 30-day administrative leave.
Mayor-elect Johnson naming his transition team today.
They have deep ties to the Service Employee International Union.
An Illinois appellate court justice and best-selling author has testified at the ComEd bribery trial in Chicago.
As the government gets ready to rest its bribery case against the so-called ComEd 4, prosecutors saved potentially their most damning witness for last.
Our panel today is Chicago Tribune political reporter Alice Yin, David Greising, president of the Better Government Association, and WBEZ state politics reporter Dave McKinney. All right, Dave, prosecutors wrapped up their case in the ComEd corruption trial. So why don't you walk us through some of the week's highlights, starting with yesterday's testimony?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been at this now for a month. This trial started in mid-March, and
yes.
So I think it's now we're in the defense phase of this. And on Thursday, former ComEd CEO Ann Pramaggiore took the stand at the very end of the day. It's a bit of a gambit on her part because she's the only one of the four defendants who so far publicly has said that they will be testifying in their own defense. I mean, this is a case, of course, that revolves around the theory that, these four defendants, all former ComEd executives and lobbyists, conspired together to bribe former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan with, ghost contracting jobs, favors and things like that in exchange for favorable legislation. So far up into this point, with the prosecution resting, we've heard close to 150 video and audio recordings. I mean, the prosecutors have just laid on an avalanche of evidence here, and now, in Pramaggiore, she's trying to soften the image that jurors might have of her. They've heard up to this point some pretty damning tapes of her, fawning over Madigan, signing off on some of these job hires of his. I mean,
interesting.
It's just fascinating to watch. She'll be on the stand for at least a few more days, and I think prosecutors are licking their chops at a chance to get at her, because she's going to, at one point or another, she's going to have to answer for these allegations.
Yeah. Let's turn now to testimony from a guy named Ed Moody. Who's that?
Well, he's not a household name, but if you're in the political world, he's a big deal. And he was on the witness stand as a prosecution witness he had an agreement with the government that they wouldn't charge him. He is the self-proclaimed #1 precinct captain, formerly, for Madigan, which in the 13th Ward was a big deal. He was an expert at going door to door. He would parachute into Madigan's closest legislative races around the state, just an expert at relating to people. And he was one of these people who got one of the no-show contracts from ComEd. His contract was filtered through a consultant who was also on trial, former City Club President Jay Doherty.
He got a $45,000 a year salary.
$45,000 a year salary, and it was quite amazing listening to him on the stand, not shy about saying he did nothing for most years for this money. It just arrived $4,500 every month, and he thought it was a reward, basically, for all the good work he had done knocking on doors for Madigan. Madigan had arranged this for him.
Yeah.
I've watched this trial closely, followed this trial closely, and I've been waiting to see the difference between just Chicago-style politics and the way Madigan operated, much of which is probably not illegal, and something that you could point to and say, that looks illegal. And his testimony about about all the work he did that was other than work for Commonwealth Edison, I mean, he's the first witness that really starts making the case, I think, as opposed to just kind of really sleazy but possibly not illegal conduct. I don't know.
I mean, it's hard to judge how these things go. I mean, if you look at the track record of the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's like this kind of everywhere you look. But their rate at prosecuting criminal defendants is over 90%. So I mean, the odds are stacked against these folks. But then you hear how they were conducting business over the phone, over these secret wiretaps, and in meetings. And there was one call in particular where Mike McLean, one of the defendants here, a confidant of Madigan's, former ComEd lobbyist, is having this meeting with the guy that took over for Pramaggiore at ComEd, and explaining to him the benefits of having these no-work subcontractors in place. That they, can you imagine?
Oh, gosh.
And he harkened back, because McLean has been around forever.
Yeah.
Harkened back to how in the old days Madigan used to be able to say, "Hey, I need to get." Some meter readers hired. ComEd would say, "Hey, we're going to have 7 meter readers in your ward. You get to pick 4 of them." And he called that old style political patronage. And it was just fascinating to hear how it worked. The curtain has been pulled back on Madigan's world.
Any other takeaways we should have from this trial this week, Dave?
Well, I think this past week there were a lot of dramatic turns. I think moving forward, it's just going to be fascinating to see how these defendants try to portray this, what we've all seen and heard the last month, how it's just supposed to be legal lobbying. And I do think that, that there's a difference between, taking busloads of people to Springfield to push for a bill versus what we saw here, where somebody, you think about how would your household budget be affected if you had just $4,500 arriving in the mail every month? That would float, a new car, a new kitchen, whatever.
For sure.
And that's kind of the benefit that these people in Madigan's world got, thanks to, the state's monopoly.
Well, our friends on social media are chiming in. Shamrock Bloom says, "Great report from Dave McKinney this morning on the prosecutor's cross-examination." Thanks for that, Dave. And on YouTube, Mike Rooney says, "I'm still following the trial, but I've lost interest just because I feel like the case is pretty clear-cut." And Mike says, I'm interested in hearing how much Lisa Madigan knew about all of this. We never hear her mentioned in any of the stories, but she must have had some idea of what was going on, right?
Well, Lisa Madigan, it's interesting because a lot of her legislative policies when she was Attorney General clashed with what ComEd was wanting. So it kind of, she's sort of on the opposite side of the coin here in a way from what the prosecutors, the way they framed the case, that Madigan was there to be helpful to ComEd. Well, Lisa Madigan was having her people try to fight a lot of ComEd's
One of the early
bills.
pieces of testimony was him cutting a deal with ComEd to take a position to basically undermine her legislative agenda. And so she's a party to this, but not because she was in on the deal. She actually, her father turned against her in order to do business for ComEd.
I mean, it's not the first time we've seen that. I mean, there's no question in my mind that there's genuine father-daughter love in that family.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Politically, though.
But politically, I mean, you think back to like 2014 when she was contemplating running for governor, and she was just about ready to pull the trigger on that. And then her one demand was, I don't want to run for governor and be governor if my father is Speaker of the House. And Speaker Madigan would not step aside for his daughter at that point, and she pulled the plug on her candidacy.
That's telling.
This is why Chicagoans love politics so much.
So
There's
colorful.
Just so many things. Never a dull moment. All right, Alice, in another courtroom at the Dirksen building on Wednesday, a federal judge handed out a sentence to a longtime Chicago fire inspector and ward precinct captain. What are the details?
He was, I think, in aid to Sandoval, who was also tied up in a red light corruption case before he passed away. And I think it just is another case of the many that are stemming from the Madigan machine and kind of, I guess, demonstrates how it's kind of crumbling and which, on one hand could be a good sign for the future of rooting out corruption in Illinois, but it also is kind of concerning because it shows that, there still is this pervasive culture of kind of just brazen, flouting of like the ethics laws and regulations. Yeah. And as I feel like there is a new chapter arriving in Chicago politics where people are bucking the establishment, I think what we have to look out for, what remains to be seen, is whether the culture is going to be left behind or whether we're going to see a repeat of old patterns.
Yeah, we're talking about 72-year-old Rudy Acosta here, who pleaded guilty 2 years ago to misleading the FBI about former state senator Sandoval, as you mentioned, and other elected officials too. And so now the judge has given him a 1-year probation sentence. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. And if you're just tuning in, we are going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with Chicago Tribune political reporter Alice Yin, WBEZ state politics reporter Dave McKinney, and David Greising, who's president of the Better Government Association. A reminder that you can watch us on WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube pages. We are live right now. You can also chat to us. And as you've heard, I'll read your comments on the air. Sticking with you, Alice, we're going to move from the federal courthouse and talk city politics for a bit. Now, we're still waiting for final results on a couple of the aldermanic races, aren't we?
Yeah, I believe two, which I'm not too familiar with off the top of my head, but for the most part, I think we have a pretty good idea of what the city council makeup is going to be come May.
Yeah, looks like the latest here is Tina Hone conceding to Desmond Yancey in the 5th Ward on the south side. And on the west side, incumbent 29th Ward Alderman Chris Taliaferro declared victory over activist C.B. Johnson. This was on Wednesday. Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson announced some of his transition team. That happened earlier this week. So who's going to be working for the new mayor?
Yeah, so I believe it's two longtime officials with SEIU, which was, one of his very big labor supporters in the campaign, and someone from his campaign who has worked a lot with political consulting of progressive circles and another grassroots organizer. So I think this all goes to show that as people were speculating what happens, when the movement gets to City Hall, this is another signal that he is going to be doing things differently, that he is going to be taking with him the labor support that, got him this victory. And we're going to see what happens when someone from the union background becomes the person in charge.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, David? I mean, what do these appointments, you think, tell us about what the Johnson administration will look like?
Well, certainly the union influence is notable and quite a contrast to the team that Lori Lightfoot put together when she took over the mayor's office. The other thing, I wrote a column about this for the Tribune this week, and as I was researching this, I was looking into the background of these people, and two of them have really strong roster of clients who do business with the city. A lot in the gambling sector, some in airlines. One of them has a client, the city of Joliet, which has $1 billion 10-year contract with the city for water. And so the intersection of politics and business and lobbying is quite interesting and I think notable. 4 of the 5 people on Lori Lightfoot's transition team ended up working for the city. One of them, the chief of staff, and one of them is deputy mayor. And so these positions are really important historically in terms of setting the trend toward what the administration winds up doing. Like Lori Lightfoot, Brandon Johnson has used the Civic Consulting Alliance, which is encouraging to us as residents of this area, that these are professional people who really know how to staff an administration. A new mayor ends up hiring about 400 people, most of them strangers to the new mayor. And during the next 5 weeks, a lot of thrusts of the administrative policy agenda will be put into effect. And so the decisions that he has made in staffing his transition committee with these 5 people are really important.
Another important hire for Brandon Johnson, that's going to be the police superintendent. Yesterday on Reset, we talked to Anthony Driver, who heads the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. They're the ones tasked with bringing Mayor-elect Johnson 3 top candidates this summer for superintendent. Let's listen.
But most importantly, I think at the top of my mind is somebody who puts the community first. I don't think we've had a person who has done that in a long time, and I think that's one of the things that's missing in our city. So when I say we're looking for a uniquely qualified person, we're looking for somebody who can kind of set the trend and who can start that.
So this is going to be a very different process for selecting a police superintendent. Have we gotten any other hints about what the mayor or the commission might be looking for in a police chief, Alice?
I think Brandon Johnson throughout the campaign trail didn't give too many details besides just talking about values and that he wanted the person to be a Chicagoan. So remains to be seen. But I think he's definitely thinking about a lot of factors because it's a very crucial decision, especially given how demoralized I think a lot of the rank and file were under David Brown. So it's really a decision among many decisions he probably won't want to take lightly, but the upper brass has really thinned out over the past few years. There's not that many contenders to think of.
Lots of turnaround,
if you want someone from Chicago.
Turnover.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
The history of taking people from within the ranks is very, very mixed. Eddie Johnson was fairly effective till he blew out on a personal matter. But Phil Klein, who came from the ranks, was not a strong superintendent. Richard Brezek had significant problems. And we've seen people like Charlie Beck and on a very short-term basis, and then Gary McCarthy, who came from outside. Those are 2 outsiders who came in and had big impact. Just because David Brown failed in the job doesn't mean outsiders per se are wrong. And it'll be interesting to see who is presented to Mayor-elect Johnson, and also if he pulls a Rahm or a Lori and takes somebody who's not even on the list.
If he says, that's great and all, but I've got somebody else.
Exactly.
Speaking of CPD, and before we take a pause, Dave, interim police chief Eric Carter, he made headlines this week recommending disciplining the officer who shot and killed 13-year-old Adam Toledo. What are the details?
Well, the Chicago Police Board in May is going to be taking up this case again about whether to fire Officer Eric Stillman, who was involved in the Toledo shooting. David Brown advised against discipline against the officer, and so now this is a turnabout that will settle hopefully this long-standing case. Now, I mean, we all remember that horrible video of what happened to that young man in the alley, and there were, it's one of those things where you look at it and it's a split-second decision, and it's horrible to see a life snuffed out. But at the same time, it's hard to know what you would do in the shoes of that police officer when you saw a gun at risk there and you didn't know what the intentions were.
It's difficult on multiple layers, right? And then,
of
course, add to that he was a kid,
Yeah.
right? Mike Rooney on YouTube says, I'm happy to see that He recommended the officer be relieved of his duties. You should not be allowed to be a cop if you shoot someone who's running away, especially a 13-year-old child. Shamrock Bloom on YouTube says, "Me too. That case was egregious. That young man shot and killed while running away. A 5-day suspension is laughable." I mean, it's interesting, I think, to see how two superintendents can actually come to such very different conclusions on what should happen here. So that really does speak to what we were saying before, the importance of who is going to ultimately be chosen as the next superintendent.
Yeah, and I think it also, another interesting thing is like 2 other policies are stemming from that case in which, Mayor Lightfoot wanted to and succeeded in reforming the foot pursuit policy as a direct result of that shooting, right. And then another one soon after. And Mayor-elect Johnson wants to get rid of ShotSpotter, and one of his main reasons he cites is that shooting, because that's what alerted cops initially to where Adam was.
Yeah. We'll take another pause. That is Chicago Tribune's Alice Yin, WBEZ's Dave McKinney, and the Better Government Association's David Greising. Believe it or not, there is more news. Crazy, right? But first, we'll check back in with Lisa Labas. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, wait, there's more. So a court appearance this morning for a National Guardsman accused of leaking highly classified military documents. Jack Teixeira did not enter a plea at today's hearing in Boston and was returned to detention pending an appearance next week. Meantime, prosecutors have unsealed charges and revealed how billing records and interviews with Teixeira's social media comrades helped pinpoint the suspect. He is charged with unauthorized removal and retention of classified and national defense information. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has signed a bill to ban abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy, giving the Republican a major conservative policy victory. The law will take effect only, though, if Florida's current 15-week ban is upheld in an ongoing legal challenge, and that's currently before the Florida Supreme Court. Historians and archaeologists in South Carolina are getting ready to rebury 12 unknown U.S. Revolutionary War soldiers who died in the 1780 battle at Camden. The ceremonies will start on April 20th. They're the result of months of work to carefully excavate the bodies from shallow graves, take DNA samples and study them, and give them a proper burial where they fell on now protected battlefield land. Several of the soldiers were teenagers when they were killed. This is WBEZ.
On the next Science Friday, are you lactose intolerant? You're in good company, as tens of millions of Americans are. For as much as we love our ice cream and cheese, about a third of us are lactose intolerant. We'll talk about why the bacteria in your microbiome may be key to lactose tolerance. It's all on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
That's this afternoon at 1 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago.
Hi, it's Steve Inskeep with an easy way to support this station. Donate a car that you don't need anymore. It's free to you and could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. Thanks.
Find out how at wbez.org/car.
WBEZ is supported by UI Health, announcing its new specialty care building and outpatient surgery center located in the heart of the Illinois Medical District. Learn more at uihealth.care. A healthier future starts at UI Health. By Loyola University Chicago School of Environmental Sustainability, empowering the next generation of environmental leaders to solve today's pressing climate challenges. Learn more at luc.edu/environment. And Wrightwood 659 on April 18th, Bangladeshi photojournalist Shadul alum speaks about photography as an essential tool for social justice. Tickets at Wrightwood659.org. This is WBEZ.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and if you're just joining us, it's our weekly news recap. Now, before the break, we got the latest on the trial involving ComEd lobbyists and the details about the Democratic National Convention that's coming to Chicago next summer. Now, with me are 3 world-class local journalists, Chicago Tribune political reporter Alice Yin, David Greising, who's president of the Better Government Association, and WBEZ state politics reporter Dave McKinney. You liked that, didn't you?
It's good.
That's like you're smiling there.
World-class local journalist.
I mean, shout out to Andrea Guffman, our world-class producer.
Go, Andrea.
of the weekly news recap. All right, so back to the news here. Workers at the Museum of Science and Industry, they voted to organize a union. This is becoming quite the trend at local museums, David.
Yeah, it certainly is. The Art Institute, the School of the Art Institute, the Field Museum, the Newberry Library, they've all been rolling into this big union movement going on in Chicago. Getting back to what we were talking about earlier in the show is like there is a union thing happening here. The next up is the Museum of Science and Industry. 54 members signed a letter of intent to unionize, and given the trend, it probably will end up happening. The common thread here is these workers feel like they're underpaid. They feel like they're worked too hard. A lot of them are being asked to work a lot of overtime, et cetera. And when you have others also unionizing, it's we've seen it happen in the news industry, right? We've seen unionization in newsrooms that previously weren't unionized as well.
Sure have.
It is rolling through certain industries.
It's rolling through the universities as well, right? We've got strikes going on at several public universities this week. Get us up to speed, David.
Right. Brandon Johnson, mayor-elect, made news early this week by showing up at one of these strikes at Chicago State University, the first time in memory that a mayor has shown up to kind of walk a picket line. And we're seeing also strikes at several different universities up here in Northern Illinois, Governor State University, Eastern Illinois.
Eastern Illinois, I'm hearing, just reached a tentative agreement since we've been on the air. So.
Alma mater.
Is it? Is it your alma mater?
They turn out great journalists, world-class local journalists.
Exactly. The product right
That's
here.
That's right, Charleston, Illinois.
The issues that at each of them are serious, that in the midst of, in some cases, declining enrollment, which is causing additional pressure on the universities. The administrations are trying to cut costs, and yet the staff feel like they still have to be paid. It's a tough situation. The interesting thing about Johnson showing up at that one picket line is that the governor is the boss of these union workers ultimately, and Brandon Johnson is trying to form good relations with Governor J.B. Pritzker, which Lori Lightfoot did not have as mayor, and so it was an interesting choice that he made to go out there and show up for those strikers.
Do you agree, Alice? I'm sure you saw that. What are your thoughts on what that signals about what we're going to see over the next 4 years? Having Brandon Johnson on the picket lines at CSU.
Yeah, for sure. I think it will be very interesting as the term goes by how active he will be in kind of sending messages like that when it has to do with government unions, ones that J.B. Pritzker would oversee. I think in this case, he was on the picket lines of a university that it has financial issues, but it serves a majority minority student population, and I think it really does fit in with what Brandon Johnson has been talking about, where he is asking why shouldn't they have attract world-class faculty and et cetera, et cetera. So
this was very much on brand.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
All right, let's stick with schools for a bit, Alice. Students at 2 Southside Chicago high schools, they've got new leaders this week. What's going on?
The short answer is we don't know. CBS is very tight-lipped as usual.
All right, next
story. But yeah, I think what I can say is I'm sure this really frustrates parents where the story seems to be again and again that big seismic changes are happening among staff and they're left in the dark as to what is going on with these administrators that are in charge of looking after their kids. And I don't know what the actual investigation entails, but will continue to probably be an issue bubbling up at schools.
Yeah, and just some additional context, not much, as Alice pointed out, but we've got Everett Edwards, who's taking over as administrator in charge after Lindblom Math and Science Academy's former leader, Abdul Muhammad, was removed. Now, Muhammad was reassigned. This was after an investigation, but CPS didn't reveal what it learned about the former principal. And then at Hyde Park Academy, Kenneth McNeil is now administrator in charge after CPS suspended the former principal due to another investigation that is also not public. So that lack of information, I just think, probably just leaves a lot of parents and students and teachers wondering what's up, what's going on here.
Right, and it also could just lead to a lot of unhealthy speculation.
True.
I think one of the schools on the South Side we're talking about here, there was a rumor about teachers, sending students to the polls and making them vote for Brandon Johnson, like seniors or whatever. And then there was some speculation that they were removed because of that, but the investigation actually started a lot earlier, so that's probably not what happened. But,
so people are making up all kinds of stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Dave, 21 schools across Illinois, they got alarming calls this week. Now, we talked about this at the top of the show last hour, but remind us what happened for folks who are just joining us.
Well, these are called swatting calls, and they've gone out across the state, Chicago, Aurora, Rockford, Springfield, and basically it's a situation where schools are fielding these calls, with threats that there are active shooters targeting those schools, and in each case, local police, law enforcement is having to activate to basically investigate these things, and in no case was anything found to be true.
Yeah.
And so in this, it's
so as far as we know, law enforcement officials, they don't know who the caller is.
No. So it's a clearly an act of terrorism in a way. Is it coordinated? I don't think law enforcement
Some people were wondering
knows.
if it was just some random kid trying to get out of doing the SATs, because that's what was also happening.
Well, I mean,
on that day.
Possibly, but I mean, I think the fact that there are so many of these calls going out all over the place, it hints at something coordinated. And does it happen within our borders? Does it happen, from one of our enemies someplace abroad?
Is it activism on the part of students who have walked out on classes during the middle of the day to make a point about their feeling of lack of safety within schools? It might fit into that context as well, which it's very disruptive, as is walking out of class, but a false alarm, if that's what it is a different level of danger that's created because of the police response that is required in a situation like that.
Yeah. Our friends on YouTube chiming in on these education stories. Mike Rooney says all of our educators need to be paid a living wage. Everyone needs to be paid a living wage. Glad to see Brandon Johnson on the picket line. Michael Marsh disagrees. Brandon Johnson made a bad call when he joined the picket line. That's what Michael had to say there. Arise Chicago says workers are unionizing everywhere. Yesterday, the Portillo's food production workers in Addison just unionized with the iron workers as well. And then Michael Marsh adds again, Brandon Johnson should stay above the fray. He made a bad call joining the picket line.
Welcome to being mayor, Brandon Johnson. Everything you do now,
everything you do.
Second guest.
You can't win them all. All right, let's switch gears, David. Illinois is getting $67 million. This is from an e-cigarette manufacturer.
Yes, Juul, the e-cigarette maker. This is part of a national lawsuit that involves a number of different states, of $462 million settlement for Illinois, New York, California, Colorado, Massachusetts, New Mexico, Washington.
A lot of places.
It's not just the state of Illinois,
right.
But nevertheless, what we've seen here in Illinois as elsewhere is that Juul, in part because of its misrepresentations, its failure to disclose that nicotine was in these e-cigarettes and also was going to addict our children, they are paying the price. The thing is, the market has changed. Juul is no longer dominant, but plenty of kids are getting their hands on e-cigarettes. And given some of the academic studies about the impact of vaping on young people's brains in particular, it's not just that it's addictive, it can also rot your brain. Stay away from e-cigarettes, kids.
Don't
I
smoke.
second that.
Yes. Yeah, some of the restrictions being placed on Juul, they include a limit on the number of purchases an individual can make. The company can't market directly or indirectly to youth, and they cannot provide free or reduced priced samples. So that should help, right? David, sticking with you, yesterday at St. Sabina's Father Flager was part of this group that was protesting outside the Walmart in the Chatham neighborhood. What was going on with the retailer?
Well, what's going on is Walmart is closing stores in the Chicago area. They're not pulling out of the market entirely, but have announced plans to close them very abruptly in Chatham, in Kenwood, Little Village, and Lakeview. This is not unlike what happened when Whole Foods moved into Englewood with all kinds of publicity. To Walmart's credit, they did move into this market pretty aggressively. Went into some neighborhoods that needed this kind of investment, but they claim that they've been losing more than $10 million a year, and their losses have been growing. And at some level, you just can't sustain those persistent losses. And so when the city works with these big retailers to try to develop these markets, there has to be a way to find that market and encourage that market. And it'll be interesting to see what Brandon Johnson does. He's intended to build on to Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Invest Southwest program, get economic development going in these cities.
Right.
It's a big loss that these major retailers can't make it go. But there are others who are perhaps willing. Aldi, for example, is one.
Yeah.
Save-A-Lot.
I mean, you're losing a
cetera.
lot with Walmart's got everything, right? And in a lot of these neighborhoods where the stores are closing, I mean, we're also talking access to groceries for folks who are otherwise living in a food desert, and access to medication, right, with the pharmacy.
3 of these stores were mainly groceries. One was a supercenter, but you're absolutely right.
Which is a
Walmart
massive
just
loss.
delivers
Yeah.
everything when it moves in.
And it's an issue that I think mayors have never really cracked the code of. Like, how do we incentivize and get these affordable grocery stores to stay in these neighborhoods? Roms, I think he offered a TIF to Whole Foods. That didn't work.
Right.
Lori, she has... I think she's like acquired land around some West Garfield Park empty storefronts, and it remains to be seen what will be done there. But
Yeah, and the food desert problem is really substantial because it has impacts on public health, et cetera. And so it's a real blow to these communities to lose Walmart.
And also a huge blow. I mean, they got days' notice, right?
Yes,
It's happening
yeah.
so fast. Walmart lobbied really hard for years to get into Chicago. So is it surprising to you folks that they decide to close several stores and with hardly any notice?
At some point, businesses that are losing that amount of money can feel like, hey, we gave it a go and it didn't work. And somebody has a line manager who's got to defend those losses year after year. And if they've been losing money for 10 years, at some point, they're going to stop. It's unfortunately not shocking. It's good to see people like Father Flager hold Walmart accountable, put pressure on public officials to not give up, because we can't afford to just see company after company walk away from these communities.
I was surprised by some reaction from more like right-wing media and some more conservative like aldermen and officials trying to solely pin it on crime or on like Kim Fox or shoplifting or the riots, because I don't think that really cut into their bottom line. In the end. They were losing profit.
I'm not
there.
surprised at all for some reason. Well, before I let you folks go, looking ahead to next week, what are you going to be keeping an eye on? Dave, you first.
Well, I am entrenched in the Dirksen Federal Building for the next week, so I think that will be where I'll be.
Do I have to ask?
But I think the short thing, will the Chicago Bulls be still playing basketball next week?
Good question. Hope so. Fingers crossed. David.
Well, I have a sports idea in mind as well. Jonathan Taves played his last game for the Blackhawks together with Patrick Kane, won 3 Stanley Cups during, I think it was 15 seasons. The transformation of that franchise, and just remembering what they brought to the city. And we were a Blackhawks town, and they've become just a complete sideshow lately. It's pretty sad.
And finally, Alice, real quick, what are you working on?
I'm going to look into Brandon Johnson's Springfield agenda, as he might go there next week. He's going to try to build inroads, and top of his agenda is passing an increase to the real estate transfer tax to fund homelessness services, also known as Bring Chicago Home, which never succeeded under Lightfoot, even though she did favor it during the campaign trail.
Oh, that'll be one to watch for sure. That is the Chicago Tribune's Alice Yin, WBEZ's Dave McKinney, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you all for watching us on YouTube and for listening. That's it for Reset. The show is produced by Meha Ahmed, Stephanie Kim, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Micah Yason, Claire Hyman, Michael Liptrot, Andrea Guthman, and Andrew Merriweather. Dan Tucker is our executive producer, and Ethan Schwab and Dave Miska were our engineers this week. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine. I think there's supposed to be rain tomorrow, so stay away from that. But we will meet again soon.
It is 12:58, and you are listening to 91.5 Science Friday coming up next. So the rain, not until Saturday night. That's what the National Weather Service is telling me. And then all day on Sunday. Maybe some snow on Monday. That's fun. WBEZ is supported by your membership and by the Music Institute of Chicago, presenting the Marcus Roberts Trio April 15th at Nichols Concert Hall in Evanston, playing the music of